I'm here with William Oliver and William Barnes, who are the founders of a research network which is not dissimilar to GLG or Tegus, that's called In Practice, but with a slightly different business model. And the world is changing so rapidly that now these two guys who are like half my age, I feel like everybody I learn from these days is half my age, are in a position to teach me and the rest of us, I believe, about how to do primary research, investment research. So it's a real pleasure to have you both. And I guess I'm going to go to, I'll allow you guys to decide. I'll just say, William, introduce yourself.
Over to you, Mr. Barnes.
I think you can go first, man. You're the incumbent,
well, we say
William,
that we've
here.
been dealing with this issue for years, Guy. As we've worked together in our past life, Will and I were colleagues at a business called Third Bridge, which is one of the major incumbent expert networks where we got to know each other. So I'm one of these strange people that could probably call themselves European. I think, Guy, you and I spoke about that on our first conversation at the end of last year. I was raised in French for most of my life, grew up in Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, France, and then 6 years of high school in Germany. I now live in Berlin, spent most of my life and have since high school spent most of my life with Germans, surrounded by Germans, and feel quite German. So I did a degree in history and political economy at the School of Oriental and African Studies in London, and got straight out of university and into the primary research world, where pretty serendipitously, I can't tell you exactly how I fell into the job, but Third Bridge was building a unit. So this major expert network, and much smaller at the time, this would have been 8 years ago, and they were building a content business. And they described this job to me as spend half the day reading, studying businesses, the other half of the day interview someone. And I couldn't quite believe that was possible or true. And here we are 7-8 years later, having really built a life around that.
Ich wusste nicht, dass wir diese Interview auf Deutsch machen könnten.
Ja, können wir auf jeden Fall machen, aber für Will wird es wahrscheinlich ein bisschen schwierig, glaube ich.
Aber weißt du redest, well, sometime later we'll maybe do a conversation in German, but I never suspected you of speaking German at all. And now actually I hear you and I hear a slight intonation, a slight German intonation. And I didn't realize you'd grown up in all those countries. We have something in common there that I would really love to explore with you at some point over a coffee. And I really want to do it now. But we're going to dive into the work of expert networks because I think it's just a really interesting topic. But why don't we allow William Barnes to introduce yourself before I dive into the question asking? Go ahead, William.
Well, unfortunately, mine can be far, far simpler. And so I was born and raised in London and haven't really moved much since. Yes, really, as a kid, was playing football. I guess soccer to any US listeners, the real football. As a child, until I was 16, played for professional clubs. That kind of didn't work out and made the choice to go back into education. Went to university, studied finance, and then ended up finding, I guess, the world of investing. And so it was pretty interested in games and the competitive side and I guess the behavioral and psychological, but also technical side of investing. And just became pretty obsessed with it since then. Left university, done a master's around the same field, and then went to work for a family office in London. So just kind of been in the investment world since. And then went to start a kind of wealth management business with a friend that I met during my master's. That didn't work out very well. So it was kind of like a busted emerging fund manager after a year. And then met this guy. It's a funny story, actually. I was working for a fund in London. I literally got a job. I was there for like a month or 6 weeks, not even that, and still in the kind of probation or the 3-month period. And I met this guy then, and was speaking to him about what they're up to at Third Bridge in the primary research world, and just understood the back, because I think it's important to understand the backdrop of MiFID II in the research world, that come in 2018, I think it was. But even then, late 2016, they were speaking about the implications of MiFID II and the fact that fund managers have to spend their own dollars or out their own pocket on research more and more in Europe. And so what Furbridge were doing in terms of a new type of independent research was particularly interesting. And so I remember a conversation that we had. I asked you one question, Will, about, what do you spend your day doing? And like you just said earlier, you said, I literally spend, 4 or 5 hours reading. And then the interesting part was that you get to spend the other 3 or 4 or 5 hours speaking to the people that are running the businesses that you're studying. And then you have a feedback loop of working with some of the best investors that use these services. So that was pretty attractive. And I jumped ship immediately, and the rest is kind of history. And here we are.
So I actually want you guys to lay it out for me and for others like me. It used to be that Expert Networks was GLG and maybe 1 or 2 competitors. Why doesn't whichever one of you normally does it lay out, in sort of simple terms? Many of the people that I'm friends with have know Tegus and work with Tegus, but I've now met many others. Tell us about the industry. Tell us where it was, tell it where it is, and where is it going, I guess. And I think that you probably have better insight than I do, because we're clients and you see, I guess, your competitors all the time. And you've conceived a different model for In Practice. And I'm just curious to hear it without asking you too much. Tell us what the world looks like. What is the universe of expert networks?
Well, I think maybe taking a step back and looking at the history of the industry. So, and from my understanding, GOG and Furbridge, the business we were working at, they are kind of pre-internet businesses, right? So they were founded late 90s, early 2000s or mid 2000s, really before the modern day internet, really. And if I also remember correctly, the major users of these primary research services are actually consultancy companies, McKinsey, Bain, BCG, and the big private equity shops. And typically what they are is they're almost like high touch, high service operations where, if a pitch deck comes across the desk of a PE associate or someone at Bain, and there's a new company going on the block in a month's time, they have to get up to speed very, very quickly on their company because they have to put a deal in and they have to, make sure they're competitive. So what happens is that the majority of the work these big primary research companies do is they are really like outsourced high touch partners for private equity and consulting companies, where you'll have a consulting firm or the analyst will message the GOG at 11 o'clock at night saying, I need to speak to 10 people from this company, and GOG and the rest of them have to compete. So what happens was these businesses were built in a way that is a high labor cost. You employ lots of people so you can serve these clients very quickly and very efficiently. And then you source executives, historically from your own network, your personal network, but then eventually from LinkedIn as that started to grow. And then you would sell the connection or the access to the executive as a fee. And I think one thing that's pretty interesting is that as this service has started to grow, and mainly to hedge funds and to, frankly, other investors who found it valuable, that old model still stuck, right? Where you have the expert network serving these hedge funds in a similar manner as they serve the old private equity and consulting companies. But what's interesting is that the hedge fund doesn't need to speak to a person executive tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. They just want to speak to someone really good. So what we realize is that there's potentially a different way to do things based on who your clients are. And I think that goes back to the unit economics of this industry, right? Because on average, it costs $1,000 to speak to an executive from the likes of GOG or the big competitors. But actually the executive only charges or earns about $250 to $300 a time. So that's a 75% take rate effectively for connecting two parties together. If you're just connecting, right? But the point is that these companies don't actually just connect. They are really high touch services. Now, the other interesting point is that let's say you've got a 75% kind of take rate. The other labor cost beyond that is the recruitment cost. And actually, if you look at how efficient you can be in sourcing executives, clients pay around $150 or $200 to $250 for the recruitment cost. So you're actually paying the same amount in recruitment as the actual executive receives for the knowledge. So it seems quite interesting where you have this misalignment of what the client's actually paying for and how much that cost of servicing that client actually is, So there's a lot of somewhat inefficiencies for a modern internet, from an internet world, right? That's the backdrop to how we look at the industry, where we believe there's a lot of friction in the industry. And it doesn't necessarily have to be friction, but it's really how those businesses are built in the history of the industry, where it seems like they've emerged from serving consulting and private equity clients that are really high touch, high service services. And most people, I'd be interested to hear what you think, Guy, about how you'd like to be served from one of these companies and the cost and the benefit analysis.
Why don't I dive in and tell you? I mean, you probably know everything that I'm about to tell you, but maybe the listener doesn't. Is that so? The first kind of idea that somebody like me would have when faced with GLG is, oh, but I can do that myself, or I can pay somebody internally to go after these people. And especially given the quality of LinkedIn, I mean, LinkedIn has grown a lot in quality, it seems to me, that effectively the aggregate quality of the bios in LinkedIn has gotten so much better. But my experience with going out to executives on a cold calling basis and to say, look, I'd like to talk to you, or even I'd like to pay you to talk to me, does not elicit a very good response. And the executives are not particularly comfortable to talk. So I found that going after conversations in that way was very, very hard work. I also found that, especially as a small fund, and I was way smaller, GLG didn't have any product that was less than $180,000 or something per year. And that was way beyond anything that I was willing to pay or could have afforded to pay. So it was just a world that was not open to me. And I also had the impression that, and I know that there was some litigation around this some time ago, that the really heavy users of these expert networks were people investing in biotech firms who could get some advanced insight into the way a study would go, which have a huge impact.
I think that was just from that Black Edge case, right? I think that was really, there was a big scandal. There was litigation around some hedge fund used, I think it was GLG or one of the big services to get information on a new drug.
Yeah. And then I left it alone. But then what restarted my interest was, first of all, that GLG was happy to allow me to trial to see how it worked. And I decided, usually for my world is that if you've had recently good performance, everything looks cheap. If you've gone through a dry patch on performance, everything looks expensive. And it was also the insight for me that I could work with GLG to build my network. So, it wasn't like I was going to do these calls anonymously. So what I learned was that many of GLG's clients do it anonymously, and I didn't want anything anonymous. I also have a pretty tough CFO, and so I did not succeed in justifying that cost to him. And so right now we're in abeyance on GLG, although we have some very, very nice relationships there. They really have some very high quality people who work there. I did trial the Tigris service. And what I found difficult with the Tigris service is that I'm reading anonymous interviews, I'm reading anonymous transcripts, and the person who's at the corporate side, I don't know who it is. And so, first of all, I found, it's like, seems to me that a big part of understanding where somebody's coming from is being able to know who they are. And what you'd get is just this very narrow, senior manager responsible for IT services or something like that. And then, this is like 3 or 4 years ago, I experimented with a kind of like, there are some services that work on a kind of ad hoc basis. But it was actually some friends of mine from ValueX who talked about In Practice. And the best I can tell is that it's almost like you could turn this into a podcast. The only thing is that as a podcast, it's harder to monetize, and you're kind of saying, people who subscribe get access to the podcast content, but if you don't subscribe, you don't get it, and you kind of run it slightly different, but to a podcast. But Yeah, it's a whole different world. I mean, even my decision to start a podcast was partly driven by this idea of learning in public. I realized that I had this idea that I could even potentially conduct due diligence conversations with people in a podcast format and publish it and let them hear what I was talking about.
It's really amazing. And I think even just from the work that we've done, if you take some of the companies that we've done, 2, 3, 4 interviews on, you naturally attract the shareholders of those companies, right? And so we've found that we actually are in a position where we have published some work and done some work in public, learning in public, and then we attract all of the shareholders and we have these conversations about the company with them. It's really is fascinating. I think it's the most effective way to learn. You have to be willing. We look dumb and stupid many times, right, on Twitter or in the interviews mainly, but it really is an effective way to learn, because you might get the shareholder be like, they'll be the first ones to point out that you're wrong on one of their stocks, right? So we get this crazy feedback loop, and that goes back to what really kind of interests us about this type of work in the first place. We just found ourselves really falling into this direct feedback loop where we would do upfront independent research on the company, learn about the business. We'd then conduct an interview with a former executive, CFO, CEO, or senior director of the company. That would then be, back then it was live. So we would do live interviews with Fairbridge's clients. They would dial in. And then after the interview, you get feedback and discuss the company and what the executive said directly with the people that are
concerned.
Yeah. So we get to this crazy feedback loop that was just rapid, that we could learn by. And that was like a mini form of learning in public. And now we're just doing that on a much bigger scale.
And I guess what's also interesting, I mean, I actually, this was reported to me from Sam Harris, who's a sort of a well-known public philosopher and author of multiple books. My son loves him because he's an atheist. He's an adamant atheist, like my son. He actually said that it's much faster and easier to produce audio content. So to go and have a conversation with somebody is so much easier than sitting down and writing something. And for the listener, we started this call almost an hour late because I had audio issues. But the reason why I had audio issues is that the people listening to this are going to be in a train, going to sleep, going for a jog, and most likely they'll look like William Oliver. So for the listener, William Oliver's got some Apple earpieces in, whereas William Barnes has got some headphones like me, but you're kind of right there inside their ear. So it's kind of relatively straightforward to produce, far easier than writing, and gets to a really, really intimate space, and people can respond. So as I understand it, and I don't know if I was saying this to you or to somebody else, Apple, whatever you do with your transcripts, does its internal transcript of every single podcast that is uploaded or that is distributed through their system. And then when you search Apple Podcasts for any word, it'll have listened to every single word on every podcast they've ever carried on their system. And so you could type some strange combination of words and they'll find you the podcast that mentions those 3 words. So you just don't know who you're going to hear from, in addition to the shareholders, as you put. So just for your interest, this is all a weird, beautiful, but also very difficult world for me and people in my generation to come to terms with, because all the investment knowledge that I gained up to around 2 or 3 years ago had to be hard fought and won. I had to get invited to an analyst meeting. I had to read annual reports. I had to get into the room with the right person. And now suddenly, there's a room available 24 hours a day. If you want to learn about Roku, there's 18 podcasts where the CEO's talking. And I've been searching transcripts on Bloomberg. It turns out I'm supposed to be typing the search term into my Spotify or Apple account. Then you layer on top of that, there are a small number of companies, the FANGs, etc., whose business models, they've got these new business models that in themselves have been hard for me to come to terms with and understand. And through the kind of ease of investor access to insights about the business model in part, and other things, those share prices and the returns have been through the roof. And then you've got everything else. So it's a strange thing that even if I take on that kind of new research mechanism and learn about Roku, I can go and access 18 interviews with the CEO of Roku. So can anybody else who wants to search their podcast stream. And then we can all plunge in and pay, close to an infinite multiple of revenues for the company. But basically, this idea of doing research by learning in public is tantalizing and fascinating, isn't it? And that's part of what you're tapping.
There's a funny story on that guy where, I think it was autumn last year, September last year, where we was publishing some content and it gained some traction and we had a big spike in people that signed up. And we got this message from one guy, and I won't say who it is, but he said, "Why are you doing this? Why are you giving such good information away for like so cheap? You're like ruining the edge we've got."
He said that. He's a buy-side guy.
He's a buy-side guy, and he said, like, why are you giving this away so cheap? Like, part of the edges we got is we can get access to this information and others can't.
Right.
And that just really hit us, was like, wow. Like, and that also gets back to, if you go back further, like, what was the informational edge that hedge funds or buy-siders had, and how is that changing? How could that change the dynamics of alpha, or how you guys can outperform? It's a very different world to not only learn but also just, I guess, run money.
Yeah, it is, and it's just it's confounding. I mean, the only thing I have to say to that is that, so I'm not going to tell you you're taking away my edge. I'm not sure if I had edge in the first place. What I would say to that is that it shows how profoundly fair the world can be, because somebody like me can't build up advantages that I would like to have built up just based on 20 or 30 years worth of experience. And so there's a certain justice to that, which I don't like. Don't like at all. But it's there. And, for those of you who are interested, I mean, I haven't listened to anywhere near enough of the In Practice podcast, but they're effectively podcasts that are behind a paywall that you need to be a subscriber to attend. And you guys, in my view, are trying to create evergreen content. So you're not trying to find out what the latest spark at the company was. You're trying to get deep insights. And in a certain way, you're leveraging. I mean, both of you are curious in the same way that I and many of people of my ilk on the buy side are about what really makes a business tick. And so there are, I'm looking here, Burger King UK offline to online food delivery, and they've got the current CEO of Burger King UK, or Amazon's outsourced fulfillment strategy from a former director of external fulfillment in Amazon. I mean, I wouldn't know how to access these people. And it's actually interesting. Another aspect of this is that to the extent that they're okay to talk, the executives themselves are promoting their own brand by talking to you guys. And it is also worth saying that, unlike a traditional expert network where it's one exec to one investor, more or less, in this case, they don't know how many people will listen to this, which is absolutely spectacular. And then for what it's worth, there are also kind of, quote, courses where the guys at In Practice have taken particular subjects that I understand is kind of driven by your interest, and they've pulled together a series of lectures. So I was just super fascinated to see they had the CEO of Ferrari in China talk about the Ferrari philosophy, for example. So you kind of, everybody talks about Ferrari having a special DNA, but how many people can talk about what that DNA is? And here you have some people who are talking about it. And interestingly enough, the two Williams were so kind to me because you actually laid out some really, really spectacular questions for me to ask you. And I guess I'm going to get into it now, which is, well, I'll start it off and then we'll see if you agree or if you want to change. So what has happened to investor relations and investor conference calls already for a long time is that you would get a bunch of analysts working for banks who would dominate the call, and they would ask, they'd basically be sitting with their financial model in front of them, and they'll be asking, I think that your sales, based on everything you've said, is going to grow 7%. Can you tell me, is the range between 6 and 8, or is the range between 5 and 10? But they're not kind of deep philosophical questions. Now, I would say that to the extent that you've read my friend William Green's book, Richer, Wiser, Happier, and Nick Sleep and Kay Zachariah in the UK, through their work at Marathon, were able to have a far better relationship to the CEOs of many businesses where they could ask these questions. But it wouldn't happen on conference calls. It definitely wouldn't happen through investor relations. But in a certain way, it seems like, why is it that I can't learn about these companies directly from them? I have to come to In Practice. Why aren't investor relations doing these things?
They've just got different incentives, I guess.
It's really incentives and the game that's being played. And I think it brings us a great deal of joy to have taken a step back over the years and looked at a process and designing a process that's structured around the joy of learning. And we have our own interests in compounding capital over time and studying the greats and understanding how to become a great investor. But underneath all that, that's really more a byproduct of what's underneath, and incentives that we've designed around trying to understand how things work, agnostic of price. Trying to drill into, and you mentioned Nick Sleep, and I'm deeply excited to read William's book. But we have a quote pinned to our Twitter feed from Nick, offering a view on where his success has come from, and talking about how rarely it was from having a truly differentiated position, and much more the success, or his success, was down to understanding the deep realities of business.
I don't know that quote from Nick. What a great quote. Where did you find that?
Yeah, I think one of his letters. And it might have been in specific reference to Amazon and Costco, but it struck us. And his letters have been very influential for us.
It's in his old letters, yeah.
But sorry, just to call it out, because actually, a podcaster whose name escapes me that I used to listen to a lot, that was a value bomb right there. He's kind of a funny guy. He says, catch you on the flip side. I don't remember. The Entrepreneur on Fire, John Lee Dumas, he says, he'll stop and he'll say, listeners, we just had a value bomb right there. But so just to repeat the quote before you go on.
And actually, because I found it, and let me do justice to it. So this is quoting Nick Sleep. Our most profitable insights have come from recognizing the deep reality of some businesses, not from being more contrarian than anyone else.
Wow. Isn't that, I've hung out with Nick Sleep. I've read his letters. I didn't see that, but that is just like
value bomb.
Yeah, value bomb, exactly.
But that's also how we look at the work we do, because I think we do believe that, in terms of where we fit in the research process, we aim to add value to long-term shareholders of companies that we actually cover. We try to cater to the highest common denominator, right? Which is the people that actually own securities, own the equity of the companies we cover. The work that we do, we're not going to share anything completely unique that you can't find or hasn't been discovered before about companies that are typically like 20, 30, 40, 50 years old. But what we've found that it does from the people that subscribe to us and what they've said to us is that this interview helped me build confidence in how the company really operates, and I think it's just that it's getting back to the realities of the company rather than trying to find unique pieces of information, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, it's like, I just want to pause with that for a second and just take it in. But it's just funny because that's what I guess investor relations ought to be doing, but they're not doing, and that's just interesting to me. And, there are some podcasts that do it. So I guess Pat O'Shaughnessy is probably the best known, and he gets some extraordinary people onto his podcast. And he's become really good at it seems to me. And there's this guy, Tobias Carlisle. And, I've kind of like slowly waking up to this, and I'm about 3 years behind them. And I may never get to where they are for all sorts of reasons. So how do you position yourself when there are some buy-side investors who are investing their own and other people's money, who are kind of doing that kind of conversation for free in a certain way? Pat does not sell research. He doesn't try to monetize the podcast at all. The podcast is kind of a freemium. It's a free, it's like it's a brand exercise and also a research exercise for him. You could have gone a similar business model if you'd have wanted to, presumably.
Yeah, we could have gone the ad-driven way. I think it's really just who are you catering to? Right? I think the ad-driven model, and I mean, Invest Like the Best, I've been listening for years, right? And I think it just caters more towards the mass market, right? And we're looking to cater towards long-term shareholders of the companies we cover. So there's a very different structure of the conversation, flow of the conversation. We'll go and try and find some customers or suppliers or someone who, and really get into detail on how a specific part of the business will work. So it's not necessarily interested in a mass market.
Yeah, it's true. Pat's kind of like, it is entertaining to listen to it, and you're not trying to be entertaining. You're going after knowledge, which is a really, really, really good point. And then, just because, and I'm not a subscriber to the premium service. And when I checked it, I discovered there's like 500 people waiting to sign up. So who knows how In Practice selects, but it seems like you have to audition. But tell me, or tell the listener about why somebody would, or how you plan to develop your premium service, which is actually what you effectively become is the outsourced research arm. Tell me again, and tell the listener perhaps for the first time.
I think it also goes back to how this evolved, right? So we started kind of doing our own thing, doing just what we know to do, which is like study companies, find great executives, interview them. And then we attracted certain funds. They reached out to us and said, look, I love what you're doing on this company, on Ferrari, but can you go and interview someone from this company? And so we kind of evolved to really work closely with funds now. And what we do today is we are experimenting with a select few funds, 10 to 15 funds at the moment, where we will work closely on certain companies they want to cover. And we will source executives for them for a very competitive, the cheapest fee in the market. And they can either do the one-to-ones themselves and they're recorded and only available to premium users, or we can conduct the interviews alone. And so what we do is, the idea is to create a very high quality community of investors that think for the long term, study great companies, and focus on creating great content for a select few group of premium users. And then going forward, back to the kind of structure of the industry and the friction that we believe is in the industry, that we think that over the long run, we can take part of the friction out and build a system where, like you said, why can't I go and find someone who I'd like to speak to? So we're hopefully going to, give dollars back effectively to both the clients and also the executives, right? So it's a win-win for everyone, where we can create a system where you guys can go and find executives, speak to them very quickly and efficiently, but also the executive then gets paid more.
I would imagine that what you're going to find is that this thing will scale up. You might have to find analysts, if you like, who are going to conduct the interviews, because you won't be able to do them all. You may have to kind of like scale up on production capacity. I mean, I did the first 2 or 3 or 4 podcast episodes on my own, and then pretty quickly realized that if I didn't want to spend all my time playing around with Adobe Audition trying to edit audio files.
We have a team that does that already for us. So there's about 10 of us in total right now that work, 5 kind of full-time, half of the others on part-time that do all the production stuff.
But so you can foresee that there'll be an element to what you do which becomes a kind of a media production company, effectively, which is kind of,
well, it's like a publisher. Like the way we look at it is, we're almost like, we have content that we create internally that we interview, so we're almost like a publisher, and then we're also like a network on the side. And as this scales, we always say we've got about 300 to 400 companies on our coverage list that we think are high quality, mainly in Europe, but also in US, that are kind of sub 10 billion EV. And we just say, like, if we're going to go and plow through the coverage list over the next 3-4 years, over the, in 2025, we're going to have, 4,000 to 5,000 vetted executives on those companies.
Yeah, it's fascinating because the more you do, the more valuable your content gets, actually, which is kind of fascinating. So let's move on. You really, guys, you put together such a great set of questions here, and I really enjoyed what you wrote about, what is dialogue? I don't know which of you wrote it. Maybe both of you did. But should I just say it's something produced by In Practice is what I can say. And it kind of asks the question, what actually is happening when we're discussing something with somebody? How are we actually learning? What does the conversation look like? And so I guess, standing on one leg and without much time to do it, perhaps one of you wants to sort of like give a summary for somebody who didn't get to read it yet, what they'll get in the document. And I get the sense that you haven't published it publicly yet. Give us a sense of what you plan to do with it.
Yeah, no, that's right. So it's a very rough draft. I mean, it's really our thinking and our conversations about this stuff that we sort of wrap together very roughly. So you've seen a rough draft of something that will eventually be published. But I think if I were to try to draw out a couple of themes that really fascinate us about the question of what is dialogue, what is quality in conversation. The first thing, I mean, one could invert, which is what is not high quality conversation? What are the obstacles to conversation? And very quickly, if you think about this stuff, you get into questions around that can be quite painful and difficult around self-awareness. And am I aware of where I'm actually at on the subject, of what my blind spots are? And as you'll have seen from the article, Guy, that there's one person in particular, the work of a physicist called David Bohm, that has been really powerful and an amazingly eloquent voice on dialogue. He's devoted a lot of his time and professional life to thinking about this far more deeply than we have, but it's been influential. And what he talks about a lot are these ideas of coherence, and dialogue as a means of reaching coherence, of rising from error. And that involves recognizing our role as listeners, as participants, and a real sort of going through an almost brutal discipline in looking at what our desires are in relation to the subject of conversation. Looking at, and I forget where this line comes from, and I don't know if it's in the piece, but it goes, "The truth awaits eyes unclouded by longing."
Yeah.
And so it's really like, what am I what do I want? What do I want about this business? Do I like the executive? Am I disposed to actually try to force the executive or my interlocutor into a particular flow of conversation, no matter how subtly? Am I rewarding the person I'm talking to by affirming or negating them? And where's that actually coming from? How helpful is that? And
this is particularly relevant, though, right, for investors, because when you're interviewing an executive, you want to love the company. Right? You know what you want to hear. And so it's very easy. I mean, I find myself doing this on the conversations all the time. And I have to check myself because I like a company. I like what I see when I research it. And I want to be told it can be a 10 bagger. I want to hear that. And so I have to really stop myself manipulating a conversation to kind of hear that.
Well, you've become self-aware enough to realize that you might subconsciously be manipulating it, which is already an extraordinary start given where many of us are coming from. And I think in a certain way it's interesting. So as you'll know from my book, I kind of said, don't talk to management. And part of why I felt like that was the right answer at the time was all the pitfalls that you kind of identify in this article that come up when you talk to somebody. And so, but my response was the wrong response. In the book, the response was, well, don't talk to management. Read the documents, read the kind of like publicly available information, study it intensively, and then maybe at the end have one or two conversations. And I think that that's wrong because you shut off lots of potential information. And the right approach is to become super self-aware of all of these kind of meta factors in the conversation, and the realization that I think that it's perfectly legitimate if you're meeting with a management team and you realize that you're being sold to, is to shut that conversation down pretty quick, basically, because you're not going to get very far with it. I guess something that maybe offline I can try and connect you up with resources on this front. So, well, I'll just share with you a little bit. So, I was reading this morning. I don't know if this is already covered, and I haven't properly digested what was written here, or if you want to include this in the article. So, one is a principle for life is, or two principles that I try to use in every conversation I conduct. One is hold myself to the value of treating everything that's told me as confidential, unless the person telling me whatever it is they're telling me gives me express permission. I should assume that they told me only for the sake of telling me. And my point is that if I actually conduct myself in that way repeatedly in life, I think I'll have more interesting information stick to me. So if you're kind of the mainframe, the person who's either the gossip monger or the person who shares information quickly, you're a great source for a journalist, or you might even be a good journalist. But people only tell you stuff when they want the world to hear about it. Some of the most interesting insights are insights about the world that people don't want the world to hear. So treating stuff that is said to me as confidential is extraordinarily important. I think I've done a reasonably, even better than reasonably good job at that. By the way, in investing, it comes to, not acting on information that you receive. Well, obviously, if it's non-public, then there are rules around that. But there may be times when friends share insights and you can't go buy the stock until they give you permission to buy the stock. But then the other rule that might be interesting is basically never ever tell anybody what to do, ever. So the only thing you can do is say, if I were in your shoes, I would, or, in a similar analogous position, I did ABC. And these rules actually stem from an organization called YPO, which sort of puts together these forums. They have a kind of forums of business leaders talking to each other in a confidential setting about business problems that arise for them. And then there's a third kind of way of conducting these conversations, and perhaps it's even a kind of a rule, is that, well, it's this idea that you hear the other person, you listen to what feelings come up for yourself, and then what they want you to do is share those feelings. Now that's kind of a little wishy-washy or little fluffy for a due diligence conversation. People are not monoliths, and there can be any one of a number of motivations, as you so well identify in the article, as to why the conversation is going where it's going. And at least I think where you've got me is that I have to lift the lid off that. It's almost like if I'm going to write up an interview that I did, I have to ask myself, what was going on in the meta conversation? So, and I think it's great. And I could totally see that, to the extent that you guys are producing intellectual content, or sort of you're producing your evergreen content, that becomes a part of your content, actually, is sort of teaching people how to conduct due diligence interviews, actually.
What I was going to say was interesting is that if you just look at the way we spend our time today versus 3-4 years ago, because we have to do research on the company to understand the company to a certain level, but we also need to understand the person that we're interviewing, deeply. And so we spend far more time now relative to what we used to in understanding the person, understanding where they're coming from, what's sensitive, what do they think about the world, what do they think about the business, and then understand how to craft a narrative and actually have a conversation, and the line of questioning required to have a good conversation, rather than just kind of getting on the call and just plowing through a list of questions.
Right. Right.
So we spend far more time on the tangible side rather than the company side.
And really, to be very blunt, I mean, it comes through just screwing it up hundreds of times. And what we have is, in a strange way, for Will and I, our careers are on paper in a PDF archive. And we've got, sort of coming up to 8 years of interviews that we could revisit. And it's pretty painful. In our industry, it's very easy to get into a mindset of wanting to extract information, to quite an extractive mindset. And well, what do you know? That makes the person on the other side feel like they're in a dental chair, or it can, or so actually really coming into a awareness of how you go about, all the way from who are you actually working with, and what do they want, and what do they need from you, and what can you give them to their worldview. And as Will said, we spend massively more time now investing in actually first establishing a win-win relationship with that person, understanding what we can give them, building trust so that they feel comfortable, making sure that to your point earlier, in building trust with people, making sure that we're not putting them in a situation where they're sharing anything that they don't want to share. So that really involves understanding what their boundaries are.
It's a complete paradox, though, right? It's a complete paradox because you need to know what you're talking about with the company. There's no point me interviewing an executive and talking about 5% of revenue, right? Like, so you need to do lots of preparation, understand what drives the business, but then detach yourself from what you think about that, and then listen to the interviewee, listen to what they're saying, and let them tell stories, not just give answers. Right?
So let me ask you this. You've talked about an 8-year archive. And, I kind of brought up a number. It's not 18, but if I want to listen to the CEO of Roku, I could listen to 4 or 5 hours worth of interviews. And so we've got this extraordinary explosion of content. What's going to happen to all of that? You've got an explosion of content right there. And you're just, one part of the world. What is due diligence going to turn into? Is it just going to turn into people sitting around listening to podcasts and recorded conversations?
I think it's a great question. I think we think a lot about the lifetime value of a piece of content. If you were to amortize one interview, how many years would you amortize it? Like, what's the value of this piece? And we look to extend that as far as possible. And I think part of the issue that I personally find is that there's a lot of content out there, but none of it's deeply valuable to me as a shareholder of the companies that I would follow. And so I think it's really just, how can you have high quality conversations with high quality people that are effectively timeless? And that probably will probably not be in 10-minute or 5-minute short form videos, right? And so that's what we're focused on.
But I'll ask you this, and it's something that is both positive and negative for me. So one thing I've learned is that if you hit the top of the organization, that's where the vast majority of the knowledge lies. So that's not entirely true. Often something will be going on at the mid-levels or lower, and the senior management don't know about it yet. And it's a trend that's taking place in the company or the industry, and they haven't learned about it. But my experience has been that the conversations with people at the top of corporations have given me far more insight, because they have an overview of the whole thing. And they may not have their information right, and they may not have their insights right, but basically they're far more interesting people to talk to. So if you ask me for a subject, and you ask me for anywhere from a consumer of the product to a regional manager to the global CEO, I want to hit the global CEO or the global COO. They're going to probably be able to tell me the deal.
But I'll take the opposite of that. I'll take the other side of that, because that CEO is polished. He's spoken to hundreds of you before. He knows what you're going to ask. He knows how to answer the question. I would take the store manager or the general manager who runs a region, or those are far less polished. Don't do this very often, so you have to train them in how to speak and what you're going to discuss. But if you really get them to tell stories about their life, about their workflow, about what they've learned in the company, you will then get real differentiated insight about how the business operates, right? And this is the tricky part that we face, is that it's not the store manager's job to think about the overall business.
Yeah.
Well, that's not what we're going after. Like we can get that person to tell stories that hopefully could inform us in unique ways that could help you build confidence in them. So I think that we focus a lot on actually, how can we find great people in an organization that can share the unique stories that are less polished.
And hopefully get to something that's close to truth, right? I think we're all looking for some kind of truth. And so, I think Will's emphasis on real stories really matters. And it's so often, I think another thing that's changed for us over time is going from asking and really looking for the most senior people and asking them to explain their worldview and how they think things are going to evolve, and actually moving much more now to mid-ranking executives, if not occasionally managers of an individual unit or plant, to tell stories that are true about their day-to-day work, their experience of the culture, how they get paid, what they get paid for, who got fired and why.
It's just different as well, though, right? It's just a different experience. Like from the CEOs, the current CEOs that we've interviewed, don't get me wrong, like clearly, I mean, they're CEOs for a reason. You're going to have a great conversation. It's going to be hugely informative. but it also comes from a place of the person being the CEO. Right? Whereas it's a very, very different conversation when you have it with other people, and they're just two different ways to inform you.
So I want to tell you a short story to your point, which you'll enjoy. At the Berkshire meeting, there's a gathering that I go to that's actually instigated by Warren Buffett's assistant, Debbie Basanik. It used to happen. I don't know if it's happening anymore, especially not that the last two meetings have been, or the last one and the future one will be online. But one of the people I became friends with and got to know at that gathering was a senior trust officer at Wells Fargo. I remember about 5 years ago asking her, how's work? And she said, oh, I really don't like it very much these days. I mean, they're just pushing me to sell the whole time. And I'm all about relationships. And she was at this event because she'd been a trust officer either for Warren Buffett directly or one of his, something that he was related to. And so, she's about building long-term relationships. And what I did was I discounted that information. I just said, well, that's just one person. And it turns out that she was, one data point is not significant, but that data point was actually an accurate data point for what was going on inside Wells Fargo. I'm not a statistician, and there are probably statisticians who could help me to think through how likely something is to be true if I don't have a significant enough sample. And I guess the answer in that case would have been to say, well, that's interesting information. Let me go and collect some more sample data. Now, I wouldn't have known how to do that. I would have had to call 10 trust officers and see what they said, and I would have had a hard time doing that, or 100 trust officers. Although 10 probably would have done it. If you call 10 and they all have the same experience, then you know that there's something company-wide that's going on. Whereas if you call 10 and another 2 have it and 8 don't, then you can't be sure, basically. I mean, not that I'm asking you in a certain way questions about my job, but I'm curious to see what you answer. When you get those single data points, and sometimes you can't go and get the extra 20 or 30 to try and make it significant, how should an investor, what should an investor do about that?
That's your job. It's
Exactly.
your job. I think like I said, we speak a lot now about the people that we interview. And I think what we look to do before each interview, we highlight the potential biases they'll be under. And so every conversation we have, every piece of information, every potential opinion or view that we get from an interview has to be handicapped. You have to handicap that based on the bias of the person that you're speaking to. And I think doing that is really, really hard. I think that's just the artful side of investing, right? That's why it's so fun.
I would tell you that I think that some of the investors that I respect the most, and I think that's something I aspire to do, which is a whole other conversation perhaps, is so actually what I want to get to is where my life isn't divided between, say, due diligence interviews and the rest of my life. And I think that if I were ever invited to Sun Valley, I think that what's great about Sun Valley is that you're out there enjoying the mountains and you're enjoying some beautiful scenery and you're having some great conversations, even if it's not mid-level managers. And so you're getting a combination of those things. For some reason that I don't understand why, and I realize that these are conversations with people at the top of the organizations, and I totally respect and agree with you that the middle-level managers may be a better place to get the kind of early insights, but it's still nice to talk to the top management.
It's not necessarily better, it's just different. Yeah, it's just different.
Yeah. I would say absolutely. I would say I don't think we'd suggest it's better. It's just part of a process and something that we've, I guess, ended up spending quite a bit of time doing. But I think, I mean, you can't like going without speaking to senior management. Yeah.
Also, when you speak to the CEO after a few, glasses of wine or a few beers, it's a completely different conversation, right? So I think Sun Valley and stuff like that is probably very, very different environment that you're having a conversation with someone.
But it's funny because either creating those environments and or getting into them, I've not attended as a full participant either Sun Valley or the World Economic Forum. I've been on the peripheries of like side events for the World Economic Forum. At the World Economic Forum, many people hold side events, but I have the sense that somehow Sun Valley's got some better stuff going on there. That's I'd be curious to understand it. I'm going to move to the fourth topic that you guys brought up for me, and sort of like as a way of kind of bringing this to a close, which I think is really wonderful. And I think that I'm going to learn something. But I'm going to ask the question as you stated it and just hear what you have to say. So the fourth question, as the two Williams wrote it, is what are the pitfalls when conducting primary research, and what are some practical steps to overcome these pitfalls? And just for the listener to know, this is based on more than 2,500 interviews with executives. And, you guys are at least half my age, if not lower. And I think that maybe I could say that I've conducted 2,500 interviews over the course of my career, but even at the course of my career, that would be 100 a year. It's a lot of interviews. So you guys have a lot of experience. Share the wisdom.
I think to look at them on two levels, there's maybe a thread that might unite a number of pitfalls is, and it speaks to, I think, the way in which it's very common in our industry to approach management interviews and conversations almost as an extractive operation, where there's a checklist of things that I have, and this is what I know what I'm looking for, and I'm confident because I've done the work, and I don't want to waste. I want to get this done as quickly as possible. And so you can very easily slip into a frame of mind where you're quite intolerant to someone engaging with you in a way that you might not expect. So we've struggled with that for a long time. And I think another person that's really, it's a word that I love that I came across recently in a book from the founder of Visa called One From Many, a guy called Dee Hock, who's I really recommend, and in an amazing systems level thinker. And what he built at Visa, which is an incredible organization, is fascinating. But a word he uses, and he uses the word to educe, and it seems to have influenced deeply his entire life philosophy and has practically manifested. I mean, it's a very practical idea. It's a beautiful word, but a very practical idea that went into building Visa in trying to understand a system and making space for the components of the system to play. And so I'd contrast educing to inducing, and mistakes that we've made time and time again of trying to induce a certain outcome from a conversation, as opposed to investing time in a structure and understanding who you're actually working with, what they value, what they stand for. You could look at it as a process of removing blocks to the natural flow of conversation and the natural flow of information. And very much as we all know what it's like to talk to a great friend or someone we trust deeply, and how there's a natural flow between human beings that can occur when trust has been built, when the foundation of mutual respect. I find that, and it's almost all encompassed in a way for us in this word educing, which is a way to approach conversation, can really very quickly wipe a number of pitfalls from the list.
When we were talking, you mentioned that you have a checklist. And actually, in a certain way, In Practice is not just an expert network, it's also an educational platform. And so, well, I guess it's fun to pose as well, everybody should know I am a client. So I'm not posing as a client, I'm a client, but it's a fun question to ask you, as if somebody was a prospect, would be to say, well, is there any element, do you think I can improve in my due diligence conversations through becoming a member of your expert network, so to speak? And what do you ever get that question, and how do you answer it if you get it?
I think we talk about it a lot. We're actually in the coming months going to be organizing workshops around this based on the checklist, where I hope we'll manage to bring in some experts and practitioners who can give their side of the story as to what it's like to be interviewed by hedge fund analysts or buy-side analysts. But I think in short, Guy, we've divided our checklist into a number of areas. We've got preparation on the business. We've got finding the right executive and understanding their competencies. We've got a whole segment of the checklist dedicated to building trust. We've got a segment on asking questions and a segment on synthesis. And I think, we touched on this maybe a little earlier in the conversation around building trust and I suppose we shared that we spend a lot more time now investing in the earlier parts of that checklist. And I think to be very direct in trying to answer your question, I think getting better I'd suggest that investing more time in understanding who you're working with and building trust with that person and understanding how you can help them as a foundation for the conversation can be very powerful. And again, it's not, I mean, there may be specific instances where none of that's possible and you got to work with it. But as far as those broader segments on the checklist, really thinking deeply about who you're working with and how they see the world and what they are and aren't competent to answer. Because it can be very tempting when we've got our list and we're in that inducing mindset, you want answers on specific areas, and you have someone in front of you that may have been involved with the business for 15, 20 years, but they may not have actually, might have no basis to actually answer really probably the most of your questions.
Yeah.
And so investing that time in really trying to understand who you're working with and how to build that foundation of trust and mutual respect.
This is also part of the challenge with the industry though, right? Because again, I think you said earlier, Guy, that a lot of the connections or the conversations that investors have with executives are organized through a third party where the investor is anonymous. They set up a call. The investor jumps on the call as an anonymous person. The executive has no clue who they are, no clue what they're trying to get at. And that's not a space that invites someone to really exchange ideas freely, And the nature and the structure of the industry it creates a certain space that we're looking to create, a completely different space. I think also from that as well, from our experience in looking at how analysts use these services, I just look from my experience, the worst interviews I've done, a lot of the times I've just done zero preparation.
Right.
And I think that's just a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
This type of interviewing, primary research and interviewing executives, is a very peculiar type of interviewing. And so where you are effectively, there's a huge asymmetry of information between you and the executive. You interview someone with 20 years of experience in a company, and if you haven't done a preparation, authority bias just hijacks your thinking, and you can't then think independently or from first principles. You kind of just you jump on the back of their opinion, and it becomes what you believe in without even unconsciously. And so I think one thing that we try and do is really make sure we prepare and understand the company, understand the person, and rather than just jump in, where we find a lot of people that use these services. And again, it goes back to the history of them, right? A lot of them are consultants, a lot of them are typically junior private equity analysts that don't know a company. A pitch deck comes across their desk, they need to get up to speed. First thing they do, speak to 10 executives. Yeah. And that can be, for long-term investors like yourself, it could be potentially quite dangerous, where you just hijack your own thought process.
The idea that comes up for me is as you say these things, is that I think that the ultimate goal for somebody like me, and for you as well, actually, and we can help each other to do this, is I want to curate an environment around me where those conversations that are helping me to understand deeply the businesses that I'm interested in are just happening frequently and all the time. In a certain way, to do an anonymous interview is a very poor way to do it. To do an interview with somebody where there's value add both sides, it's worth saying that when I talked to them about my experience with GLG, the execs were never about, the people I talked to were never about the money. They weren't talking to me because they're getting paid a few $100s. They were talking to me because they were curious to see who'd be on the other side of the phone. And actually, so in each case, actually, what I did, for what it's worth, and it was, I'd get an hour with them, and I would take 45. First of all, I'd introduce myself, full disclosure to them, and allow them to Google me if they hadn't already Googled me. And then I'd always take the last 15 minutes to hear what was on their agenda, and do my best to help them and take the first steps of building a long-term relationship. The thing is that it's doing that on your own is extraordinarily hard work, because building that trust with the person, and I think that so where in a certain way, where an organization like yours may fit the best long-term into organizations like mine, is that you become partners in building those relationships. I think that the only thing that would be interesting, or may become a challenge at some point, is that you may find that you have to curate your customers. So you may find that you have some customers that are just not the kind of people that the sort of like due diligence network that you have.
That's why there's a waiting list, right? Like you mentioned, right?
Right.
This is it.
Well, my friend, and he might be your friend as well, John Miljevic at the Manual of Ideas. So he has a waiting list at all times, and once a year he opens it up, and it's certainly not, or I don't know what method he uses, but I'm pretty sure that it's not first come, first served. It's who he wants to let into it, which, I would tell you that in running my investment business, the more I think about it as a business, the less I'm thinking about it intelligently, I believe. And the more I think about it either as a family or a club. And so kind of like, I want my investors to feel that they're part of a club, that it's a special place, that not everybody can participate. And if you misbehave, you might be gently and politely invited to leave.
Well, that's how we think about this. It really is. All from the start as well. Like if you think about the way that we design the landing page of inpractice.com to the way that makes executives feel when they land on the website. Like compare that to GLG or I think we do look to architect that different environment that encourages people to really look at us differently.
Yeah, so it's a whole other kettle of fish. So we will continue this conversation in other fora, perhaps in another podcast. I could imagine. So I'll share a little bit of the thought that I had, which was that I could imagine that in N amount of time that to sign up for your service, you'll force the prospect to ask. You'll ask them questions, like you'll have to apply to join actually. And it's not signing up for your service, it's applying to become a member of the community. And actually you're curating a community, and actually people like me aren't clients or customers, we are members, and you're
partners.
I'm looking at the two members of the membership committee as we speak. But so why don't you just say what kinds of people are you looking for? And how should they get in touch with you? How do they figure out that they should be a part of this community?
It's a great question. I think we think about it in various different ways. I think firstly, it's how people look to allocate capital. If you divide up the investment world and then you narrow it down to people that even look on a longer than 1 year horizon, it kind of whittles it down quite a lot just from duration, right? So I think it's the length of duration that people look to allocate capital for, and that really defines what type of businesses they look at. So we look for people that want to allocate near permanent capital to companies. Obviously, permanent doesn't exist, but people that look for quality companies and want to allocate capital to those companies. And then secondly, people who are really open to learn and really want to be part of a community to share ideas and learn together. I think there's also this potential. I feel like historically, even kind of pre-FinTwit world, it was kind of like siloed in terms of investment knowledge and people sharing ideas and really thinking about sharing what they think about companies. Whereas today, we feel there's huge power in, like you said, learning in public, but also learning with a select few group of people that are like-minded. Yeah. And that's kind of, if you just look at what Buffett done, right? And he was the kind of first one to really share his thoughts on a huge scale, and kind of look what happened to him, right? And obviously, it's part of it, but I think we want to try and attract people that allocate capital for the long term, but also want to learn with others and are happy to exchange ideas in a safe place.
And if they're not ready to sign up on your website, what's the best way to connect to you?
So via email, you can find us william.oliver@inpractice.com or william.barnes@inpractice.com. You can find us on Twitter at InPractice. And on the landing page, there's a contact us button.
And out of curiosity, on your Twitter account, which of you, or maybe it's somebody else, is responding? Is it both of you? Is it a team? Is it one of you?
We have a team of 20 people
who are all tweeting on the same account.
No, I'm joking. It's
two of us.
You're looking at them.
Yeah, you're looking at them. And I think there's certain biases that I think if you engage with us, you'll see who's who.
So we can have fun to try and figure out who's actually written the tweet, you know?
Exactly.
William Oliver and William Barnes, it's such a pleasure to meet you, and I'm looking forward to meeting you in person. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Anytime.
It's been a great pleasure. Thanks for having us, Guy.